This podcast is brought to you by Most Valuable Podcasts, leading the league in podcasting entertainment.
What's up, everybody? Ricky Widmer here, along with the one, the only, Brandon Swanson.
Hey.
And welcome into another edition of the Primetime Podcast here on Most Valuable Podcast. You're new to the show. This is where we talk all things college, mostly college football and college basketball. So in this show, obviously, we're in college football mode as we're in the regular season. And Brandon, before we start the show, remember how last week I said, this could be a boring week, not a lot of upsets to go on. We had a lot of upsets this week.
We should have known.
North Carolina, Michigan State, Iowa State, Stanford over Utah. We almost had Florida State over Miami, too.
North Carolina
State.
There you go.
North Carolina State over Louisville.
I was going to say, I think the score is still 33-10 or whatever Notre Dame beat them by.
And we can't forget the one upset that I did pick over the Florida Skaters, and that was LSU. We had a lot of upsets this week. We had a ton of upsets in week number, 6? We're already through 6 weeks of the season.
We had a really good bunch of games to be able to watch. I was really enjoying them. Watched a little bit of the Clemson game. Saw Kelly Bryant go down with an ankle injury. They were still able to get the win. You know, they've got some pretty good backup quarterbacks, and they were well out in front. And then also watched that LSU Florida game, which was a really good game the entire time.
I know it's a good week of college football if Brandon is constantly texting me. If you're constantly texting me about games, I know it's a good week of college football. Because I'll get ones like, oh, check out that LSU Florida game. After they won, you're like, LSU beat Florida! ! I know it's a good week when I get a ton of college football texts from Brandon on Saturdays, but we're hitching with 3 topics like we always do today, followed by our picks at the end of the show. We're going to be talking about TCU football. Going to be looking at the ACC also to see, we love talking Clemson football here, so we're basically going to say who has the best shot to upset the Tigers, either the Hurricanes or the Wolfpack, who are on fire right now. And then we're going to end the show before our picks, kind of taking a look at Michigan State after their big win over Michigan. We got to overreact and say, ooh, can they win the Big Ten East? But let's start with TCU in the Big 12. The only reason, Brandon, I wanted to talk about this is because not only is TCU out to, I'm going to say a silent 5-0, because I don't think anyone was really talking about them up until this week. But now it's more important because Oklahoma State fell when TCU played them 2 weeks ago. But now that Oklahoma has fallen in conference and they're going to play Texas, who you can throw everything out the window in a big rivalry game, because TCU's undefeated at 5-0, I almost said 0-5, that would have been wrong, 5-0, and Oklahoma and Oklahoma State both have losses on the docket, will TCU be college football playoff bound this year?
Well, here's the thing, is that I think that TCU has done such a good job so far this season. They have really done a nice job. Their defense has been for real. Their offense has kept them in games. And then their defense has really been the side of the ball that's come up to make the big plays. You know, look at this week against West Virginia. West Virginia did not want to go away in this game, and they didn't. And the defense for TCU was in a bend but don't break type of mode, and that's what ended up happening is they were able to get the win at home against a tough West Virginia team. I think that the reason why you can also put them sort of in a category where they could be competitive if they got to the playoff is because they've got a defense that they can rely on, a defense that can hold down opposing teams. You look at back, just a couple of weeks ago, Oklahoma State, when they played on the road at Oklahoma State and they beat them 44-31. And they held down Mason Rudolph. Mason Rudolph, he ends the game. He ends up having a lot of yards, couple of scores, but he didn't get that until towards the very end, where things were kind of out of reach and they're trying to play catch up, and it's kind of that garbage time type of thing.
And of course, you're going to be throwing the ball more when you're down.
Exactly. TCU made some really big plays in that game, and let's not forget that Oklahoma State at that time was number 6. It was a huge game. That was a huge game, and TCU came out played well, played better than Oklahoma State, and played really good defense against one of, I think, the best quarterbacks in the country. And then you follow that up with a game against number 23 ranked West Virginia in a very close game, and you get the win. That's really, really important, especially against two Big 12 opponents. This TCU team, I don't want to crown them and say that they're going to be playoff bound, but I do want to say that they're a team that can be built to get to the playoffs and then potentially survive in the playoffs because of that defense that they show. Again, they've held down some really good teams and some really good offenses, especially with Oklahoma State and then with West Virginia. 31 points for Oklahoma State, West Virginia 24 points, and you get those wins. That's huge, and that's why TCU is really right now on a good path, certainly on a good path in the Big 12, but they've got another test coming up this weekend on the road at K-State. And K-State, they've got to be upset after losing to Texas.
Well, and I mean, that's the thing where when this question that we asked here of the will they be college playoff bound, because it's a tricky question, because part of me wants to say yes, I could see TCU, like in my mind I could visualize TCU as one of the teams being revealed, probably the fourth team, I'd say. Maybe the fourth behind, like, you got Alabama, Clemson, 1-2 right now. Maybe a third team of, I want to say Georgia, but that's only right now because they haven't played Alabama. I could see TCU being revealed at the end as a 4. The big thing that plays into their favor right now is they're in the driver's seat. They're 5-0, 2-0 in the conference. They've got some, I'm going to say big wins. They got 2 ranked wins in the last 2 weeks. But even the Arkansas win, it's not the biggest non-conference win, but you go on the road at an SEC opponent and you beat the SEC in their own house 28-7, and you kick basically everything out of them. Arkansas, kind of a flop, though, this year, not as good as they have been.
I think, though, too, and I was watching on College Game Day, I got just a snippet of this, is that they were making the point, and I think it's a good one to make, is that, you know, at the time they thought, oh my gosh, what a bad loss for Arkansas. Now, a couple of weeks later, maybe not such a bad loss for Arkansas, but a good win for TCU, and how well TCU played, and how much more positive things that you can take out of that for TCU than the negatives for Arkansas. So I think that's another good point that they were making there that I would agree with.
And the thing that benefits TCU right now is not just being 5-0. 5-0 helps, but another thing that benefits them, the loss that Oklahoma had this past week. By Oklahoma losing to Iowa State, the only thing that TCU needs to do between now and November 11th is just come in day by day, do your job, do what you need to do to get the win. Don't overlook an opponent. Come in, play your game, don't get surprised by anyone, and just keep winning. Win, 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 because K-State will be tough. I think they can get the win. Kansas, I think, will be no contest. Iowa State might be tough only because it's in Ames, and like Iowa State was able to do what they needed to beat Oklahoma, which was a top-ranked team this past week. However, I think they'd get that win. Texas, that one's still up in the air to me because, yes, they are 2-0 in the conference, but we have seen them have 2 pretty bad losses this year. And then you get the big 2, Oklahoma and Texas Tech, which to me will solidify it. But the good thing is, because Oklahoma's lost, because you're a team that has already beat Oklahoma State, TCU can, one in the Big 12, they can lose one game and still make it to the Big 12 title game. Because the way you could see it is with looking at the standings right now, if, let's say, everything plays out like we assume it will be, TCU will only have one loss. Let's say it's to Oklahoma, just for the sake of argument. They lose to Oklahoma. Well, yeah, you and Oklahoma would be tied with one loss, but if Oklahoma if they go undefeated the rest of the way, Oklahoma State then has 2 losses. Even if they beat Oklahoma, you win the tiebreaker over Oklahoma State, and you're the home team against the Cowboys in the championship game, or Oklahoma beats the Cowboys and you're playing the Sooners as the road team in the Big 12 title game. So I think right now, as long as they only have one, if they go undefeated or have one loss the rest of the way, they will for sure be in the Big 12 title game. And all you need to do is win the Big 12, and you give yourself that shot to be a college football playoff team. You give yourself a shot to be one of the top 4 teams at the end, especially if you beat in Oklahoma and in Oklahoma State. I don't even care if you split with Oklahoma, lose to them once, beat them the second time. If you have one win against them and a win against Oklahoma State, that could help you resume-wise when we get to the final rankings for the playoffs.
So here's an interesting stat, is that no team to make the playoffs so far in the new playoff system was ever ranked outside of the top 19.
Before the season started.
That's in the preseason poll. TCU was unranked to start the year. So I don't know if that works against them. I don't know if that would work in their favor to be like, okay, I could see it working two ways. You know, it works against them because they weren't ranked and then they've had to come all the way back from unranked to get where they are. Or it could be, you know, awesome job. Unranked to all the way up to this spot. That's really impressive. You've had a very, very good season. So that could go, I like I just mentioned, one of two ways. Another interesting thing is, how will the committee see it when you get to it at the very end?
Also,
if TCU,
what will be their harping point?
Exactly. Is it this year? Is it? And it seemed like it has been in the past. Do they want to put in a Big 12 team?
Well, I mean, you had 2 years ago they did have Oklahoma in there, but Oklahoma, when they did put them in there, got spanked by Clemson.
I was to say, but they have seemed to be reluctant on the Big 12, or even the Pac-12 in a sense. I know, of course, we saw Oregon
and Washington last year,
but we see, you know, it's Alabama, it's the SEC, it's Ohio State, it's the Big Ten
and the ACC.
Those seem to be the ones that, and now people will say, well, those are the Power Fives that are getting having the teams that are winning. But I think that there's been a couple of times where we've seen that they just don't necessarily like to have the Big 12 or the Pac-12. That's, you know, my opinion.
And the one thing I find funny is right now I'm kind of looking at it. 2014, that was the first year we had the college football playoff. Our Final Four at the end of the year in order of 1 to 4, Alabama, Oregon, Florida State, Ohio State. That was basically 4 of the top 5 teams at the beginning of the season. And I'm like trying to go through it really quickly just to see, because it's an interesting point that you brought up, is that how many teams, like 2015, Alabama was 2, number 1 at the beginning of the year. Clemson was 1, number 2 at the beginning of the year. You had Oklahoma, which was 5, and then Michigan State, which was a top 6 team. And then last year you had Alabama, who was number 2 at the beginning of the year, Clemson, who was the number 1 team at the beginning of the year, Ohio State, which was 6, and Washington, that was 4. So the lowest team ever to have reached the college football playoff was 6, and that was the Big Ten teams, the Michigan State, Ohio States, to reach it. So I would love to see a team like TCU make the college football playoff, only because I remember when we talked about them for our season preview. I remember saying about TCU, I remember saying I don't think they'll win the Pac-12, or not the Pac-12, the Big 12. I think it'll be either Oklahoma State or Oklahoma, but I wouldn't be surprised if they made a run. Like, they were the team when we did our previews that I'm like, they've got the pieces to be a good team, and I just had that vibe that this team could be sneaky good this year. And that's pretty much what they've been. They're 5-0 right now, but before this week, before Oklahoma lost, and we have Oklahoma and Oklahoma State with 1 loss, how much did you hear about the Horned Frogs coming into this week at all this season. Not a lot, at least on my end. Didn't hear a lot about maybe when they beat Arkansas, because it's like, whoa, okay, TCU's kind of there. They beat an SEC team. Didn't expect them to win 28-7, but I haven't heard a lot. This week now, everyone's starting to talk about TCU because it's like, whoa, this team's 5-0. They're atop of the Big 12. We got a wide open race here now with the Sooners and the Cowboys both at one loss. And the big thing that helps them is, like I said, being in the driver's seat, but it also helps when one guy we talked about in the preseason, Kenny Hill, doesn't turn over the ball, only has 3 turnovers through 5 games, has an average of 2 touchdowns per game, also has 2 games of 4 touchdowns on the year. And this past game, he scored 3 touchdowns, but 1 was a pass, 1 was a run, and 1 was a reception. Kind of the triple threat from Kenny Hill out there.
Yeah, Kenny Hill's been really good. He's been leading this team really, really well. Last season, we all have to remember, too, that TCU went 6-7 in the 2016 campaign. And every year after a losing season under Gary Patterson, TCU has come back with a 10-win season. So we can't necessarily be shocked by what they're doing so far and how well they're playing. And I really do think that a lot of the things that they're doing aren't surprises to them.
No.
That's the thing. It's not surprises to them. It's surprises to us. It's surprises to the media. It's surprises to people who are covering college football. I'll be honest with you. When we did our previews, the Big 12, the ones that I were looking at were Oklahoma and Oklahoma State. Those were the two
As were all of
that
us.
I thought were going to be the ones that were up there. And yeah, I certainly overlooked them after 6-7 last year. I was just, they'll come back. They'll get 8 wins, but they already have 5 so far on the season, and we're 6 weeks through. This team has looked very, very good. Offensively, they've been great. Defensively, they've been so sound. It's a team that's really destined right now to do some great things. They've positioned themselves in, I don't want to say an easy spot, but they've positioned themselves in such a good spot because they didn't lose those games to West Virginia or to Oklahoma State. They've already won those games, and that is huge at the beginning of your schedule, especially when later on in the season there's always that opportunity for that. I don't want to say that bust game, but for
that upset,
that upset game where you come out and it's like, that just really wasn't us, and especially since
kind of like what Oklahoma got hit with this week.
And I was just going to mention, they've got, they've. I'm not going to write them out right off K-State. They've got K-State on the road at K-State coming up, this weekend. They've got Iowa State in a couple of weeks. Then they've got Texas. Then Oklahoma on the road. Then Texas Tech on the road, who we know can put up a lot of points. They've still got a lot of tests. But they've done so well, they've gotten an A+ so far on the report card to this point. But it's good, and it's been really nice to see how well they've played so far. It's hopefully a little glimpse of what's to come for the rest of the season.
And I'm sorry beforehand to the fan base that I'm going to say this about. There's only 1 game on the schedule before Oklahoma that I'm writing off, and 2 games this entire schedule for TCU that I'm writing off. Number 1's Kansas. You get the win. Kansas ain't.
You're writing off Kansas?
I'm writing off Kansas before the game even starts. Baylor, chalk it up as a loss for Baylor. Baylor ain't going to win that last game of the season. Every other game could be an upset. You look at K-State, you don't want to write them off. There are only 2 losses, a double overtime loss to Texas and a 14-7 loss to Vanderbilt. A Vanderbilt team that only looked really bad against the top teams in the SEC, Alabama being one of them, where, remember, they were going to show Alabama how to play SEC ball because that's how we do. They got spanked. But every other game, K-State, Iowa State, Texas, could be an upset, could be one. But TCU's got to come in there. They just got to X's and O's, do their job, make sure they don't turn over the ball, make sure that they put themselves in a good spot to win the game. To me, this season comes down to 2 games. Comes down to Oklahoma, comes down to Texas Tech. Both ranked teams right now, both tough games, both on the road. If you lose one of those games, you get one loss the rest of the year, you can live with that. Like I said, one loss still gets you in to the Big 12 title game. You lose two of them, then we could be talking. Because if Oklahoma loses to Oklahoma State, but then Oklahoma beats TCU, if TCU has two losses, we're looking at an Oklahoma State Big 12 title game, and TCU gets left out. So they have to go one loss or no losses. However, we'll see what Oklahoma does against Texas this week. The Sooners lose again. That only helps TCU even more.
I was going to say, I would not expect Oklahoma or Oklahoma State to lose, but maybe one more game, and that would be to the other one. Yeah, exactly. So if even TCU can get through by losing just one of those games, they're positioning themselves in a good spot to get to the end of the season and then head into that title game.
Yeah, and I mean, if I'm TCU, the week before we play, or if I'm saying on their part, like if I'm sitting there, TCU fan, the week before you guys play the Oklahoma Sooners, I am cheering for the Oklahoma State Cowboys. Give me the Oklahoma Sooners with two losses, kind of. At that point, the ship is sailed. It's like, you know what, with two losses, can we really make the college football playoff at this point? Give me the wounded dog coming into that game, because that could up our chances to win when we go into Norman, Oklahoma. But I want to flip it on to you guys now. What do you guys think? Is TCU going to be a playoff team? Do they even make the Big 12 title game? Because that is a question also. Yes, they are in the driver's seat, but they have to go out there, do their job, only lose one game to solidify that fact and be in that title game. Let us know what you guys think down below in the comment section.